The first of the old books came back on a Tuesday, through the return slot in the worn oak desk, and Marian very nearly did not notice it among the ordinary returns. It was only when she was sorting the day's slot, near closing, that she saw it was not an ordinary return at all. It was an old book, a proper old one, its cloth cover faded and soft with age, its pages gone the warm brown of old paper. And when she opened the front cover to check the card in its little pocket, she found that it had last been stamped out from this very library 41 years before. 41 years. Marian sat down at the desk with the book in her hands, half amused and half amazed, and turned it over, and wondered who on earth had had it all this time, and what could have possessed them to bring it back now, after 4 decades, without a word. And then she found the flower. It was pressed flat between 2 pages near the middle of the book, an ordinary flower, a small blue one of the kind that grew wild along the lanes, dried now and delicate as paper, but carefully placed, deliberately placed, marking a page as a person marks a page they love. Marian looked at it a long while. It did not feel like something forgotten. It felt like something left. She might have thought no more of it. One strange return in a quiet life of ordinary ones. Had the second book not come the following Tuesday? It arrived the same way, through the slot, unremarked, and it was the same in every particular that mattered. An old book, stamped out decades ago, and pressed between its pages, marking one particular place, a small dried flower. And then, the Tuesday after that, a third. Marian, who had kept the little village library for the better part of 30 years, and who loved a quiet order in her days, found that she could not stop thinking about it. Every Tuesday, now she waited for the slot. And every Tuesday, there was another, an old book come home at last after its long absence, each one with its pressed flower marking a page. She began to lay them out on the table behind her desk, in the order they came, and to look at them together in the evenings after she had locked the door, and to feel that they were trying, in their patient weekly way, to tell her something. Whoever was returning them was not hurried. They did not bring them all at once, in a box, the way a person clears out a house. They brought them one at a time, week by week, gently, as though each book were a small ceremony that ought not to be rushed, as though the returning itself were the point, and not the being rid of them. Marian began, in her careful way, to look for the pattern, the way she had always loved to look for the hidden order in things, for a library is nothing if not order, and a librarian learns to read the small signs. She looked first at the cards in the pockets, at the names of who had borrowed each book so long ago. But the card from those years used only a borrower's number, not a name, and the old ledgers that would have matched the numbers to the names had been water damaged in a flood many years back, and mostly lost. So she looked instead at the books themselves, and there, slowly, a shape began to appear. They were, every one of them, gentle books. Books of poems. A book about the wildflowers of the county, with careful drawings. A pair of old novels of the quiet and tender kind. A book about the birds of the coast. A book of old country songs. They were not one person's random reading. They were, Marian came to feel, one person's whole loved and particular library. The books a single soul had carried close over a lifetime. Returned now, page by marked page, and the pressed flowers were not random either, for each was a different bloom, and each, she began to suspect, marked a passage that had meant something once to someone. One evening, alone in the closed library with the lamps low, Marian did the thing she had been not quite letting herself do. She read the marked pages. She took up the first book and turned to where the little blue flower lay and read the poem it marked, and then the next book and the next, following the flowers through all the returned books in the order they had come. And as she read, she began, quietly, to weep there alone in her library at dusk, not from sorrow exactly, but from the tenderness of what she was reading. For the marked passages, taken together, told a kind of story, though no one had written it as one. They were, nearly every one, about love, and about the small, ordinary days of a long life shared, and about the seasons turning, and about, toward the end of them, parting and remembering, and the way that love outlasts the one who is loved. Read one after another. In the hush of the empty library, they were unmistakably the map of a marriage, a long and happy one, marked out in flowers by a hand that had loved both the books and the person they had once been read aloud to. And Marian understood, then, most of what she needed to understand, though not yet who. And she closed the last book gently and sat a while in the lamplight and let the library hold her the way it had held a great many quiet feelings over the years. It was the following Tuesday that she finally saw him. She had taken, by then, to watching the slot. And this time, instead of waiting behind her desk, she happened to be shelving in the far aisle when the door opened softly and an old man came in. He was a tall man, stooped now with his years, in a worn but well-kept coat, and he moved through the library slowly, looking about him at the shelf with an expression Marian knew at once, for she had worn it herself in certain rooms, the look of a person to whom a place is thick with memory. He did not see her in the far aisle. He went to the desk and took from inside his coat one more old book and held it a moment against his chest before he slid it, gently, into the return slot, the way a person lets go of a hand. And then he stood there a moment longer with his empty hands and looked around the quiet library one last time, and Marian, watching from the shelves, understood that this was the last of them, that the long weekly returning was ending, that whatever this old man had been doing, he was very nearly done. She did not want to startle him, but she found she could not let him go, not without a word. And so she stepped out from the aisle, softly, and said good afternoon. The old man was not startled, or not much. He seemed, if anything, almost relieved, as though he had half wished, all along, to be found out. They talked, there in the warm afternoon light of the little library, and he told her, simply, what she had mostly guessed. The books had been his wife's. She had borrowed them from this library over the long years of their marriage, 40 years and more, and had loved them so that when the time came to return them, she never quite could, and had paid the small fines, and kept them, year after year, on the shelves of their home, reading them again and again, pressing into them the flowers he brought her, until the borrowing was so old the library had forgotten the books existed. His wife had died in the spring, and now he was old and alone in a house grown too big and too quiet, and his children lived far off, and he was going at last to live near them and to leave the town where he had spent the whole of his married life. He could not take everything, but before he went, he had wanted to bring her books home to the place she had borrowed them from, one each week, so that he might have a reason to walk down the lane to the library one more time, all through his last summer in the town, and sit with each book one last time before he let it go. He was sorry, he said, about the fines. They must be terrible by now. Marian told him there would be no fines. She said it firmly, in a voice that did not invite argument, and told him that a book kept and loved for 40 years and brought home at last was not overdue in any way that mattered to her, and that the library was honored to have them back, and honored more to have known, even a little, the woman who had loved them so. She asked him, before he went, whether she might keep the pressed flowers, the small dried blooms that marked the pages, not in the books, but here at the library, in a little dish on the desk, so that something of his wife and her long happy reading might stay in the place she had loved. The old man's eyes filled at that, and he said that he would like that very much, more than he could say. And so it was done. He left, in time, for the far-off town and his children and grandchildren, and Marian returned his wife's books, gently, to their proper shelves, where any villager might one day borrow them and never know. But the flowers she kept in a small dish on the corner of the worn oak desk, a little handful of dried and faded wildflowers, and now and then on a quiet afternoon, a curious child would ask her what they were, and Marian would tell them that they were a love story, a whole long and happy love story, kept safe in a library, which was, she had come to think, exactly where such a thing belonged. Wherever you happen to be tonight, and whatever quiet task is keeping your hands busy, thank you for spending this little while here with us. Rest easy, and whenever you are ready, there will always be another story waiting.